Welcome to a special edition of the Northern Broadcasting Service. Today we are interviewing Vivacino, the last AG of the North Pacific. Vivacino, welcome to the show.
Hello. This is Vivanco. Hello.
Before we begin, Vivanco, give us a bit of background about yourself. When did you start playing nation states?
Well, I began playing National States back in perhaps 2014, 2015. I was quite nerdy because I like political simulation games, and there wasn't many of them in Spain. I always have like some form of simulation of country, and then someday just screwing around the internet, I found this new website, and I gave it a try. My first nation wasn't Vivanco. It was actually called the Thurnia Islands. I made cartography for it, a long history. Like I don't have that nation anymore because after something in my personal life collapsed, I stopped playing around 1 year or so, and I created Bibanco in last year, perhaps 2 years ago. When I was with my colleagues in university, we all like politics, we all liked law, and we said, "Hey," and I told them that this website existed, and we all joined. We all popped in nation states and in the North Pacific. So yeah, that's how I came to be in nation states.
You said you had experience back as early as 2014. Did you get involved in regional governments back then?
Well, in a way, I did. I was part of a role playing committee about making background and history. So I didn't make as much executive things as I have currently doing and I have done in the North Pacific. I was back when I was the Third Airlines. I was more of a historian kind of way. I My first experiences in the North Pacific in no excuse me in nation states were of world building, of making some history, of making one of the region's histories. So that's just how it went, and then I moved on. But my very first experiences in nation states was being a cartographer and world builder of a region which no longer exists.
So your first experiences was more on the role play side with the building and cartography and all that.
Absolutely. I just love history. I love story making, and it was my thing. I also did the issues of my government and so on, and I tried to get into the executive things of the region, but at that moment I was pretty young. I still didn't fully understand how to do things, so I just really it really passed over my mind. I just stick what I liked, to making history, to making stories, to writing.
So what made you transfer from the role play side over to the executive side and run for office in the North Pacific?
Well, the first time I ran for office was coincidentally the Attorney General. The things I made before was being part of the Foreign Affairs section of the government of the North Pacific because I like international law, international relationships, and well, I wanted to give it a try and see how it was. And I found it really interesting. I still find it really interesting. I still am an ambassador. I still am a deputy minister, and I still like foreign affairs. But um, after a while, Denomium came to me in private and told me about how there's like very little new people inside the legal sector of the North Pacific, how new blood was really needed, and because I am in law school, I have this certain interest in law. and he asked me if I was going to try to join in into the legal community as either a justice or the attorney general or part of it. Sorry. So I told him that I didn't really want to because law for me is like this very idealized idea, this thing that requires a lot of study, concentration, and I didn't really think I was ready for it. But when I saw that when the AG elections came up and I saw my nomination, I thought to myself that the only way to acquire some experience in legal matters, which is why what I'm studying, was not only study but practice itself. So I just hopped in and I said, you know what? I have some legal knowledge. I have some people to aid me, which was the Nomim at the time, and I say, let's do it. And I just went for it.
All right. Did you know about the Agora Act when you ran for office?
I had no idea, sincerely. I I knew there was some movement within the regional assembly. I knew it was something about the attorney general, but since the I have this idea about independence of the three branches of power, I didn't give it much thought. I said perhaps this is some form of simple modification, a little peaks because legislation is always moving, justice is never stopping, it's always in move. But then, when I was already in office, I was concerned to know that this was what the Agora Act was, and well, it really hit me when I went into it. I know that it wasn't against me, but I like to joke around a little bit. I've joked before that hey, I'm going to run for justice, and suddenly this justice office disappears. Just a little hurt, little joke, just because the coincidentally I I want to clear that up because I've had this problem in the citizens chat a few days ago. I do not believe, absolutely not, that the Agora Act was made against me. It was just legislation. It was just that, and the reasoning behind the act was reasonable. The office was inactive, and it could consume a lot of time and resources of the justice system. But I just joke around a little bit, so just wanted to clear that up as soon as I could. So I hope it doesn't make any much of a problem, or I yeah, that's why I jumped into it. That's my Agoraact thing. I didn't really know about it when I ran for office, and once I was into office, I was brought attention to it, and I panicked a little bit, but I I did what I had to do.
Yeah, the Agora Act first came to be about the time I was deputy speaker, and it sort of lingered there for over almost a year now before it passed. So when it passed, what was it like for you?
It was honestly pretty devastating, but it was also a pretty bad time. It it wasn't the best time for me. I must admit that I saw it at first as the failure because as when you go to office and the office you are on is on the verge of disappearing, you feel that sense of insecurity and that you have to you can change it, and I certainly couldn't. I didn't have enough time to change it. Perhaps I changed a few minds. Perhaps I changed some people to really advocate for the elimination of the attorney general. Perhaps some people to defend it. But yeah, I didn't have enough time to really do something against it or for it. Um, but when the time came to be, I was devastated because I took it as a defeat, as because already the time of my election was pretty hard. It was pretty concerning how much people were asking for a European nomination, and the amount of people that abstain. I want to say that I didn't win that election. The abstention won. Practically, the abstention and the Agora Act won, but already it gave a little hunch of what the term was going to be, and it was really devastating how I could have that uplifting end, but and I was talking to the vice delegate to Robespierre about how my thoughts about the Agora Act, and I told him that I had that hunch that I was going to be the last AG, and he told me that he didn't think so. At that moment, the voting of the act was going all in the favor of the AG office, but in the end, we all know what happened. The Agora Act passed, and I didn't want to just stop. And the thing I did was put my farewell address, not only as my turn as Attorney General, but as the Office of Attorney General in itself. And at that moment, I wanted to retire, at least for a little bit, on TNP law, because it struck me very harshly of as defeat for myself, and it's certainly only my fault that I took it that way, because it wasn't aimed at me. I was simply the person who happened to be AG at that moment, but certainly felt the weight of the responsibility falling on me. Suddenly, all the mistakes that I have made during my term fall on me, and I had that sense of insecurity and disbelief on myself, and wanted to retire for. And if you ask, for example, the Ropia and anyone who I talked to at that time, I always claimed the same, that I was going to retire from TMP law. But now you see me here running for justice. So yeah, it was a hard week. That week it was pretty hard.
And you were AG during one of the more active terms. You had three major cases: Armenistan, IKEA Reich, and Slatos come up. Um, what were your thoughts about those cases? What was memorable about them?
Well, at first I made the mistake of giving the cases to Dino. I wasn't experienced at all in TMP law, and since Dino had way more experience than I say, well, you could try to, if you want, you could do it this, since the term, if it goes all the way, it's going to be extensive enough to have some experience and from example and such. There and well, at some point in time, I had to take over the case of Artemi Castelia. And the case of Slatos was practically all mine. Well, the most memorable case that I had was the Castelia case. Because I had this very interesting conversation with Silly String and the European, as the prosecution with the defense, about what to do, because there was this conflict, uh, that what the delegates wanted, the forgiveness, the how we're going to prosecute Artemis Castelia. I'm not going to try to pronounce the other name because I don't want to pronounce it wrong, and I am already struggling with my accent and talking in foreign accent. So my apologies. So it was quite difficult. It was moreover interesting how the it was told that I misunderstood some kind of real law principle, but that same principle is not just the real law principle, but it's a principle that applies. It's a general principle of law. It's something that every kind of law ought to have. And while I said it in Latin because as I'm learning law, most of the principles here in Spain are based in Roman law, and it's basically Latin. That principle that I wanted to maintain with the Castelia prosecution was the in Latin is non bis in idem. No, sorry, non bis in idem, which it's basically you cannot judge one thing that has been judged before. And that thing, as I discussed with Silestring, is indeed within the TMP law. It's just that it's a different concept, it's a different phrase, but in the base is it's the same. But due to all the conflict that rose from the Agora Act, I felt myself in a moment where I had to risk um, such principle um, to behold law as it is to maintain a certain establishment of the law, and I had to retard the charges with the hopes and the possibility that it won't have a certain uh, consequence to it.
Right. I think I'm following what you're saying. So, during these cases with the Ogora Act working its way through the regional assembly, it put a lot of pressure on you to really act and come forth in these active cases in the court.
Could you please repeat the question? I didn't really understand because it cut out a little bit.
I was saying that while you were prosecuting these cases, the Ogora Act was working its way through the regional assembly. So, if I was understanding you correctly, the Agora Act was putting a lot of pressure on you during these court cases.
Absolute. Yes. Because what happened in that course of action, since it was practically in the end stages of the act, what the office did at that moment was going to be crucial. If the office was going to still be inactive, not defend itself, was going to just give them the reason, and the Agora Act will just give that reason that they all claimed, and it would pass. So the pressure was really on because the AG wasn't as they claimed to be, but I don't really know if I should press on this because at the time there is the regional assembly haven't really put a substitute to the attorney general. There isn't any kind of prosecution kind except what the court could give in the future. And currently, there isn't any form of public defender for the state of the North Pacific. So, the weight of what the office did at that time was at an all time high because if really things went downhill, it was going to be my fault because I didn't quite defend the office. I didn't do what the office ought to do, and that's what the Agora Act was there to do. It was put in contrast what the office wasn't doing. That's basically the name that the Attorney General office had outlived itself, that it wasn't useful anymore. So I had to prove that it was useful. I because I ran for it because I thought it. If I didn't think that it wasn't useful, I wouldn't have run for it. So I ran for it, and with all this opposition to the office saying that it had no practical use, I had to make the best of it, and the pressure was always there.
So, as you were saying, there's very few public defenders in the North Pacific, and now with the AG's office gone, there's really no true dedicated prosecutor. What do you think the future of TMP's judicial system is going to look like post Agora Act?
Well, basically now with the Agora Act, they, in my honest opinion, they have blown themselves in the foot, because law is there to give some form of security to, because law is certain. Law is there to follow it, and if the law isn't certain, what are you going to do? You're going to jump over it. You're not going to care, because since it is not certain, people are not going to have that willingness to abide by it. The the prosecution is a form of security that the law is going to be upheld, not only by just the justice who are going to have the final word, but the prosecution is the one who is going to activate the justice. The justice are a passive past. They are just active when they are invoked to do with the prosecution. But since there isn't any kind of formal prosecution, and it's all going to be left to the regional assembly, the thing that it's going to happen post Agoract is that there's going to be some form of, like in Rome there was the tribune of the plebs. Well, there's going to be some form of attorney general that isn't going to be called attorney general, but it's basically going to do exactly what the attorney general was going to do with a different name, because the attorney general is a and the prosecution itself is essential. The reform that they want to make, which they have been keeping practically hidden and just saying that it's a well deserved surprise for those people who are for and against the Agora Act. All the things that I have in mind that they could do are things that the Attorney General already did. And that's why I think that they shot themselves in the foot, because they're going to repeat the same history. They're going to do exactly the same. There isn't going to be any sort of hyper change to the judicial system. If they want a stable judicial system that works, that is certain, that is independent, another form of attorney general is going to pop up eventually. It isn't going to be called attorney general, because that name and the history that has gotten within the region has gotten very bad press, and it isn't going to work anymore. But there is going to be practically no change, except perhaps in the election of prosecution. Perhaps the courts is going to choose them. Perhaps there's some form of bar association of public defenders and attorneys and everything between. But the attorney general as a figure, not as themselves, but as a form, is going to just rise naturally, because it's a natural judicial form.
Alrighty, well, I thank you for joining us on this special edition of the Northern Broadcast Service, and we look forward to seeing you within the region.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope for the best of the region in itself.
All right, this is the radio ministry. Thanking y'all for listening in today, and we look forward to seeing y'all in the future.